A to Z Mysteries, Book 1, The Absent Author, by Ron Roy. Chapter 1. Please, Josh, Dink said, if you come with me today, I'll owe you one. Just name it. Anything. Dink's full name was Donald David Duncan, but no one in Green Lawn ever called him that, except his mother when she meant business. Josh Pinto grinned at his best friend. Anything? He raised his mischievous green eyes toward the ceiling of Dink's bedroom. Let's see, what do you have that I want? He scratched his head. I know, I'll take Loretta. Dink tossed a pillow at Josh. When I said anything, I meant anything but my guinea pig. Are you coming with me or not? I have to be at the book nook in 15 minutes. Dink rushed into the bathroom, tucking his shirt into his jeans at the same time. Josh followed him. Standing in front of the mirror, Dink yanked a brush through his thick blonde hair. Well, he asked, are you coming with me? What's so important about this writer guy? Josh asked, sitting on the edge of the bathtub. Dink turned around and pointed his hairbrush. Wallace Wallace isn't just some writer guy, Josh. He's the most famous mystery writer in the world. All the kids read his books, except for you. If he's so famous, why is he coming to dinky little Green Lawn? Dink charged back into his bedroom. I told you, he's coming because I invited him. I'm scared to death to meet someone so famous. I don't even know what you're supposed to say to an author. Dink dived under his bed and backed out again with his sneakers. Please come with me? Josh leaned in the bedroom doorway. Sure, I'll come, you dope. I'm just trying to make you sweat. Usually you're so calm. Dink stared at his friend. You will? Thanks. I can't believe Wallace Wallace is really coming. When I wrote and asked him, I never thought he'd say yes. Dink yanked his backpack out of his closet. Pack my books, okay? I'm getting Wallace Wallace to sign them all. Josh began pulling Wallace Wallace books off Dink's bookshelf. Geez, how many do you have? Every one he's written. Dink sat on the floor to tie his sneakers. 23 so far. You should read some of them, Josh. Josh picked out The Poisoned Pond and read the back cover. Hey, cool. It says here that Wallace Wallace lives in a castle in Maine. Wouldn't that be neat? Dink grinned. When I'm a famous writer, you can live in my castle, Josh. No way. When I'm a famous artist, you can live in my castle, down in the basement. Josh picked up the riddle in the river. What's this guy look like? He asked. And how come his picture isn't on any of these books? I wondered about that too, Dink said. I sent him one of my school pictures and asked for one of him, but when I got his letter, there was no picture. He finished tying his laces. Maybe Wallace Wallace just doesn't like having his picture taken. Josh squeezed all 23 books into Dink's pack. He grinned at Dink. Or maybe he's just too ugly. Dink laughed. Gee, Josh, you're ugly and you love having your picture taken. Ha ha. Josh picked up his drawing pad. But just because you're my best friend, I'll draw his picture at the bookstore. Dink looked at his watch. Yikes, he said. We have to pick up Ruth Rose in 1 minute. He tore into the bathroom and started brushing his teeth. How'd you get her to come? Josh called. Dink rushed back into his room, wiping toothpaste from his mouth. You kidding? Ruth Rose loves Wallace Wallace's books. Dink slung his backpack over his shoulder. He and Josh hurried next door to 24 Woody Street. Tiger, Ruth Rose's orange cat, was sitting in the sun on the steps. Dink pressed the doorbell. Ruth Rose showed up at the door. As usual, she was dressed all in one color. Today it was purple. She wore purple coveralls over a purple shirt and had on purple running shoes. A purple baseball cap kept her black curls out of her face. "Hey," she said. Then she turned around and screamed into the house. "The guys are here, Mom! I'm leaving!" Dink and Josh covered their ears. "Geez, Ruth Rose," Josh said. "I don't know what's louder, your outfit or your voice." Ruth Rose smiled sweetly at Josh. "I can't wait until Wallace signs my book," she said. She held up a copy of The Phantom in the Pharmacy. "I wonder if Wallace will read from the new book he's working on," Dink said. "What's the title?" Ruth Rose asked. They headed toward the book nook. "I don't know," said Dink, "but he wrote in his letter that he's doing some of the research while he's here in Connecticut." Dink pulled the letter out of his pocket. He read it out loud while he walked. "Dear Mr. Duncan, thank you for your kind letter. I'm so impressed that you've read all my books. I have good news. I've made arrangements to come to the book nook to sign books. I can use part of my time for research. Thanks for your picture. I'm so happy to finally meet one of my most loyal fans. Short of being kidnapped, nothing will stop me from coming. See you soon, Wallace." The letter was signed Wallace in loopy letters. Dink grinned. "Pretty neat, huh?" "Pretty neat, Mr. Duncan," teased Josh. "You should have that letter framed," Ruth Rose said. "Great idea," Dink said. They passed Howard's barber shop. Howard waved through his window as they hurried by. "Come on," Dink urged as he dragged his friends down the street to the book nook. They looked through the window, out of breath. The bookstore was crowded with kids. The book nook's owner, Mr. Paskey, had set up folding chairs. Dink noticed that most of them were already taken. Dink saw Mr. Paskey sitting behind a table. A big white sign on the table said, "Welcome, Wallace." But the chair behind the sign was empty. Dink gulped and stared at the empty seat. Where was Wallace? Chapter 2. Dink raced into the book nook. Josh and Ruth Rose were right behind him. They found 3 seats behind Tommy Tomko and Eddie Carini. Dink plopped his pack on the floor. The clock over the cash register said 3 minutes after 11. "Where is he?" Dink whispered to Tommy Tomko. Tommy turned around. "Beats me. He's not here yet, and Mr. Paskey looks worried." "What's going on?" Ruth Rose said. Dink told her and Josh what Tommy had said. "Paskey does look pretty nervous," Josh whispered. "Mr. Paskey always looks nervous," Dink whispered back, looking around the room. He saw about 30 kids he knew. Mrs. Davis, Dink's neighbor, was looking at gardening books. Dink checked out the other grown-ups in the store. None of them looked like a famous mystery writer. Mr. Paskey stood up. "Boys and girls, welcome to the book nook. Wallace should be here any second. How many of you have books to be autographed?" Everyone waved a book in the air. "Wonderful! I'm sure Wallace will be happy to know that Green Lawn is a reading town." The kids clapped and cheered. Dink glanced at the clock. 11:05. He swallowed, trying to stay calm. Wallace was late, but it was only by 5 minutes. Slowly, 5 more minutes passed. Dink felt his palms getting damp. Where is Wallace? He wondered. Some of the kids started getting restless. Dink heard one kid say, "Whenever I'm late, I get grounded." "So where is he?" Josh asked. Ruth Rose looked at her watch. "It's only 10 after," she said. "Famous people are always late." Now Dink stared at the clock. The big hand jerked forward, paused, then wobbled forward again. At 11:15, Mr. Paskey stood up again. "I don't understand why Wallace is late," he said. Dink noticed that his bald head was shiny with sweat. His bow tie was getting a workout. Mr. Paskey smiled bravely, but his eyes were blinking like crazy through his thick glasses. "Shall we give him a few more minutes?" The crowd grumbled, but nobody wanted to go anywhere. Ruth Rose started to read her book. Josh opened his sketch pad and began drawing Mr. Paskey. Dink turned and stared at the door. He mentally ordered Wallace to walk through it. "You have to come," thought Dink. Ever since he had received Wallace's letter, he'd thought about only one thing, meeting him today. Suddenly, Dink felt his heart skip a beat. The letter! "Short of being kidnapped," the letter said, "nothing will stop me from coming." Kidnapped! Dink shook himself. Of course, Wallace hadn't been kidnapped. Mr. Paskey stood again, but this time he wasn't smiling. "I'm sorry, kids," he said, "but Wallace doesn't seem to be coming after all." The kids groaned. They got up, scraping chairs and bumping knees. Mr. Paskey apologized to them as they crowded past, heading for the door. "I've read every single one of his books," Dink heard Amy Flower tell another girl. "Now I'll probably never meet anyone famous." "I can't believe we gave up a soccer game for this," Tommy Tomko muttered to Eddie Carini on their way out. Ruth Rose and Josh went next, but Dink remained in his seat. He was too stunned to move. He felt the letter through his jeans. Short of being kidnapped. Finally, Dink got up and walked out. Josh and Ruth Rose were waiting for him. "What's the matter?" Ruth Rose said. "You look sick." "I am sick," Dink mumbled. "I invited him here. It's all my fault." "What's all your fault?" Josh asked. "This," he said, thrusting the letter into Josh's hands. Wallace has been kidnapped." Chapter 3. "Kidnapped?" Ruth Rose shrieked. Her blue eyes were huge. Josh and Dink covered their ears. "Shh," said Josh. He handed the letter back to Dink and gave a quick gesture with his head. "Some strange woman is watching us." Dink had noticed the woman earlier. She'd been sitting in the back of the book nook. "She's coming over here," Ruth Rose said. The woman had brown hair up in a neat bun, half glasses perched on her nose. She was wearing a brown dress and brown shoes and carried a book bag with a picture of a moose on the side. Around her neck she wore a red scarf, covered with tiny black letters. "Excuse me," she said in a soft, trembly voice. "Did you say Wallace has been kidnapped?" The woman poked her glasses nervously. Dink wasn't sure what to say. He thought Wallace had been kidnapped, but he couldn't be sure. Finally, he said, "Well, he might have been." "My goodness," gasped the woman. "Who are you?" Josh asked her. "Oh, pardon me." The woman blushed. "My name is Mavis Green," she mumbled. "I'm a writer, and I came to meet Mr. Wallace." Dink said, "I'm Dink Duncan. These are my friends Ruth Rose and Josh." Mavis shook hands shyly. Then she reached into her book bag and pulled out a folded paper. "Wallace Wallace wrote to me last week. He said something very peculiar in his letter. I didn't think much of it at the time, but when he didn't show up today and then I heard you mention kidnapping—" She handed the letter to Dink. Josh and Ruth Rose read it over his shoulder. "Dear Mavis, thanks for your note. I'm well, and thank you for asking. But lately my imagination is playing tricks on me. I keep thinking I'm being followed. Maybe that's what happens to mystery writers. We start seeing bad guys in the shadows. At any rate, I'm eager to meet you in Green Lawn, and I look forward to our lunch after the signing. Wallace Wallace." "Wow," said Ruth Rose. "First, he says he's being followed, and then he winds up missing." Dink told Mavis about his letter from Wallace Wallace. He said the only thing that would keep him from coming today was if he was kidnapped. "Oh dear," said Mavis. "I just don't understand. Why would anyone want to kidnap Wallace Wallace? If he's the most famous mystery writer in the world, he must be rich, right?" Josh said. "Maybe someone kidnapped him for a ransom." Suddenly, Josh grabbed Dink and spun him around, pointing toward the street. "Look, the cops are coming. They must have heard about the kidnapping." A police officer was walking toward them. "Josh, that's just Officer Fallon, Jimmy Fallon's grandfather," said Dink. "Jimmy came to get a book signed. I saw him inside the book nook." "Maybe we should show Officer Fallon these letters," Ruth Rose suggested. "They could be clues if Wallace Wallace has really been kidnapped." "Who's been kidnapped?" asked Officer Fallon, who was now standing near them. "Not my grandson, I hope," he added, grinning. Dink showed Officer Fallon the two letters. "We think Wallace Wallace might have been kidnapped," he said. "He promised he'd come to sign books, but he isn't here." Officer Fallon read Mavis's letter first, then Dink's. He scratched his chin, then handed the letters back. "The letters do sound a bit suspicious," he said, "but it's more likely that Mr. Wallace just missed his flight." Jimmy Fallon ran out of the book nook, waving a Wallace Wallace book at his grandfather. "Grandpa, he never came. Can we go out for ice cream anyway?" Officer Fallon put a big hand on Jimmy's head. "In a minute, son." To Dink he said, "I wouldn't worry. Mr. Wallace will turn up. Call me tomorrow if there's no news, okay?" They watched Jimmy and his grandfather walk away. Dink handed Mavis's letter back to her. He folded his and slid it into his pocket. Crazy thoughts were bouncing around in his head. What if Wallace Wallace really has been kidnapped? It happened because I invited him to Green Lawn. I'm practically an accomplice. "I don't want to wait till tomorrow," he said finally. "I say we start looking for Wallace Wallace now." "Where do we start?" Ruth Rose asked. Dink jerked his thumb over his shoulder. "Right here at the book nook." "Excuse me," Mavis Green said shyly. "May I come along too?" "Sure," Dink said. He marched back inside the book nook, with the others following. Mr. Paskey was putting the Wallace Wallace books back on a shelf. He looked even more nervous than before. "Excuse me, Mr. Paskey," Dink said. "Have you heard from Wallace Wallace?" Mr. Paskey's hand shot up to his bow tie. "No, Dink, not a word." "We think he was kidnapped," Josh said. Mr. Paskey swallowed, making his bow tie wiggle. Now, Joshua, let's not jump to conclusions. I'm sure there's a rational explanation for his absence. Dink told Mr. Paskey about the 2 letters. I'm really worried, Mr. Paskey. Where could he be? Mr. Paskey took out a handkerchief and wiped his face. I have no idea. He removed a paper from his desk and handed it to Dink. All I have is his itinerary. The others looked over Dink's shoulder as he read. Itinerary for Wallace Wallace. 1. Arrive at Bradley Airport at 7 p.m. Friday, July 15th. New England Airlines, Flight 3132. 2. Meet driver from Lawrence Taxi Service. 3. Drive to Shangri-La Hotel. 4. Sign books at Book Nook at 11 a.m. Saturday, July 16th. 5. Lunch. Then back to airport for 4:30 p.m. flight. Can I keep this? Dink asked Mr. Paskey. Mr. Paskey blinked. Well, I guess that'll be all right, but why do you need the itinerary? Dink picked up a marker and drew circles around the words airport, taxi, hotel, and Book Nook. This is like a trail. It leads from the airport last night to the Book Nook today, Dink said. Somewhere along this trail, Wallace Wallace disappeared. Dink stared at the itinerary. And we're going to find him.